Hi everyone, thanks for joining today. I wanted to give a brief demo of how to use the PowerPoint Automated Slide Builder Slicer feature for Excel. This is similar to the Automated Slide Builder feature that exists within HR Handy Tools. However, this is going to take it a step further, and it's going to allow you to loop through the values of a slicer that you may have for a dashboard and create a unique PowerPoint for each value within a slicer. So beginning with the short 10-minute demo, you can see we have the total rewards add-in in the top right-hand corner. The feature that we're interested in today is the PowerPoint ASB slicer tool. So I'll give a quick demo of how you can set this up and use this macro within your own dashboards. It's pretty easy, but there's going to be a few steps of pre-work that we'll have to do beforehand before we can actually run the macro. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll create a data table. We'll just use some sample data, but you can use this on any real data file that you have. So we'll do months, and we will show average temperature by month. We can do a few years worth of data, so we'll do January through December for 3 years, and we can just make up some random average temperatures, let's say between 30 and 80 degrees. And I will just hard code these values in. So now we have our raw data here. The next step that we'll do is we'll create a pivot table on this raw data. And the pivot table can mimic any dashboard that you have, which is based on pivots and slicers. I'm not going to get into how to use those at this point, but the point is that this macro would work on any type of dashboard in that same way. So I'm going to insert a pivot table onto a new tab. We can use the months as the filter, which we'll come back in just a second to when we put in the slicer, and we can do temperature a few times into our values just to show some basic summary statistics. So we can show the min, average, and maximum temperatures. And keep in mind, this is a very simple example, but this could mirror a dashboard that you have, which would be set up in a rather similar way with pivot tables and slicers, and you can use get pivot data formulas to make it a little more easy to read and understand. So we'll insert a slicer, and the slicer will be based on the months. So now we have our pivot table, our slicer. You can see that when you select any of the values within the slicer, the pivot table updates accordingly. So that would be similar to selecting values in the slicer, which would update a whole dashboard. The next step that we'll do after we set up our pivots and slicers is we can insert a PowerPoint object, and that's going to be the template for the PowerPoint that we're creating. Recall that it's going to be each value within the slicer is going to get its own PowerPoint, but we only have to add in one PowerPoint for the entire file. So we can add that in, and the PowerPoint will get embedded into book one. It says presentation in book one. I'll clear out these text boxes so we just have one slide in the PowerPoint. And you can see that that PowerPoint is called Object 1 embedded in the Excel file, and we'll come back to that in just a minute. The last step that we need to do before actually running the macro is building an ASB table, and the ASB table will provide the coordinates and location for the named ranges from our Excel workbook to get placed into the PowerPoint. So we'll create a new tab, and it has to be named ASB table. It'll have columns A through F be populated, and you can see in HR Handy Tools within the ASB feature how these columns should be called, but for the time being, I'll just breeze through it. So on slide 1, we will have in column A Then we need to actually select the named range. So I'm going to name this one, this will be the name range that we populate into each of the slides, and we can call that temp underscore summary. So now we can see that we have on slide 1, we're going to populate it with temp underscore summary. Column C here, this shows the width of the picture. It'll be a bitmap format, so it's going to get pasted into PowerPoint as such. It'll be, the width can be 300. If we set column D, which is the height, to NA, it'll just maintain the aspect ratio. Similarly, for column E and column F, we're also just going to put in NA, which will keep it centered horizontally and vertically within the new slide. That said, you can play with these variables to move your range around within the PowerPoint. So that gets us pretty much to the end of the setup. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save this to my temp folder within my on my desktop, so I can overwrite the previous file that I was working on. So we'll call it months underscore temp, and just for good measure, I'll clear out the other files that had existed within that folder before. As you can see, I've already run this. So now we have this within the temp folder, and we can go ahead and run our macro. So if I click the PowerPoint ASB slicer tool, it's going to give us a little warning, and it says you do not have a slicer selected. So the first thing that I have to do is I have to make sure I have the slicer that we want to loop through selected in the workbook. So now let's give it another try. This time it's going to say, what is the object name of your PowerPoint template? Well, that's easy to find. If we click on the PowerPoint template, it's object 1, which we saw before. So now let's give it one more try. This will actually run it for real. We can name it object 1, and then we can enter the file names, or we can select the file name for the PowerPoint that we're going to create. So we can call it temp underscore months. And the way the slicer is going to loop through is when it creates each of the PowerPoint files, it's going to choose this title, the one we've selected, and then it's going to append an underscore and the value within the slicer. So for the January PowerPoint, it will be called temp underscore months underscore January, just to help you know the names of the PowerPoints as they're created. So we'll hit OK, and now it should begin running. And you can see it's going to open up an instance of PowerPoint, and it's going to paste in the range for each of the sliced values that we have within the slicer. And it's going to loop through for all 12 months and save each of these PowerPoints to the same root folder for which we have this Excel file. This will take just a minute, and the speed of it will be impacted by how many ranges you have as well as how many PowerPoints you're creating, but it should run pretty quick. So it looks like it's already done looping through, and we can see now that when we go to the temp file, which we have our Excel file sitting in, we also now have all of these PowerPoints which were just created. If we go to January, let's say, we can see the summary statistics for January, and similarly if I go into the Excel file and slice by January, these should match, and they do, which is good. So this is a great tool that lets you easily create many PowerPoints based on a dashboard or Excel file that you have that's tied to pivots and slicers. There's just a few steps of pre-work, which hopefully you understand now, but it's a tool that saves me a lot of time and hopefully can do the same for you. Thanks.